Hello, my name is Shelby Corley. I'm an evaluation consultant. I am a co-founder of Three Hive Consulting and Eval Academy. I'm a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. I live and work in Edmonton in Treaty 6 territory, and my pronouns are she and her. My presentation today is called Build a Stakeholder Matrix to Maximize Utilization, and that is exactly what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So here is the format of my presentation today. Pretty simple, pretty short. I'm going to kind of frame this by talking about how we begin with the end in mind, move on to a review of our template, and talk about how we use it. So, beginning with the end in mind. Evaluation is familiar to most of us here today at this conference. It's one of many knowledge generating activities. These are some of our friends that we have on the screen. But keeping in mind that our main purpose here is to collect information that drives decision making. So evaluation is applied social research designed to inform decision making. This is the end that we need to keep in mind. When we are driving toward use, we need to be always thinking about what is it that our stakeholders want to use this information for? What kinds of information do they need? What kinds of decisions are they intending to make with that information? Basically, who needs what? And also how they will be involved throughout the evaluation. So our stakeholder matrix template is available in the session files here, and it's also in our new products section on Eval Academy, available for free download there. Essentially, it's pretty simple looking. We have 4 columns that we use regularly. Sometimes I'll delete one, so I suggest that you use what's useful and you delete what's not. I'll walk through each of these in a bit more detail, but what we include is our different types of stakeholders. So you can see some potential groupings here. If it makes sense to group them, group them. If it doesn't, then don't. Stakeholder names. Sometimes there are multiple stakeholders that fit within different types. A column where you can indicate what the purpose or the use of the evaluation is for different stakeholders, knowing that that's going to vary. And then a final column that outlines how they are involved throughout the evaluation. So we'll go through each of these in a bit more detail here. So for our key components, the first one is the stakeholder type. If they can be grouped, go ahead and group them. If not, delete the column. The beauty of working within a template is that you can adjust it as needed and make it fit your context. So some of the common stakeholder types that I might put into this column here are things like groups of funders, groups of beneficiaries, or participants in the initiative that you're looking at. If there are partner organizations, if there are academic institutions, you'll know your project, right? So however your different groups of stakeholders are grouped, you come up with those categories. And again, if you don't want to group them, you don't have to. It may be enough to just list their names. So this column could not get any more straightforward, I don't think. May not be necessary, or it may be necessary for yours. I use it quite a bit because we do tend to work in some multi-stakeholder kinds of projects. This purpose and use column is far less straightforward, and this is where you require a lot more work, a lot more discussion, a lot more collaboration to make sure that you're getting to that understanding of what your stakeholders need. So we can think back to some of the common reasons that people engage in evaluation. Maybe it's accountability. Maybe our funder has required that we collect certain components, and so that stakeholder's use is really just accountability. Maybe it's advocacy. Maybe our stakeholders want to use the results of this evaluation to advocate for additional funding or to advocate for policy change. Maybe it's quality improvement. Maybe they're hoping to learn a bit about how they can improve their processes. Maybe it's knowledge mobilization. Many times our stakeholders will have multiple purposes and uses. So I kind of have a mental list of purposes that may apply to different projects that I can suggest as a purpose, but it is always developed really collaboratively. And this is really what gets at use. If we're making sure that we understand what our stakeholders need from the beginning, keeping that in mind throughout, then we really are driving toward use in our projects. Nature of involvement. So this is where we talk about how each of the stakeholders is going to be involved in our initiative. So here we want to consider how they're going to be involved sort of throughout the project. So are they involved early on in collaborative planning? Are they involved in approving the plan? Are they going to help us to recruit participants? This is a big one for me because we're often, brought in as external consultants, and we don't know the people that we are hoping to connect with very well. So relying on our stakeholders to help us with recruitment is always really important, and I like to articulate that from the outset, that this is a really key way that our stakeholders are going to be involved. I like to put in things about their role in reviewing reports. Maybe they do have a role in reviewing the draft report. Maybe they're not going to. Maybe they're going to approve a final version. Maybe not. Maybe their role is really just to take the report at the end and then implement recommendations, come up with an action plan for how these pieces are going to be applied in their practice. So I'm going to walk through a couple of populated examples here just to kind of illustrate what this looks like in practice, at least for us. So a few of the ways that we use this matrix is one, up front in our planning conversations. So on the next slide, I'll show you a few of the questions that we ask to kind of prompt our stakeholders to think about what needs to be thought about to populate the matrix. But it's really useful in guiding our planning conversations. I often find that populating this matrix helps to clarify things about the initiative that they hadn't necessarily thought of, as well as informing how the evaluation goes. So this piece, this template table finds a home within our evaluation plan, and so it is really foundational in guiding our planning conversations. We also use it to create evaluation questions. So when we know what each of our different stakeholders is looking for from the evaluation, that's already giving us cues for what our evaluation questions are going to be, right? If some of their purpose is to improve quality, well, then we're probably going to be checking in on some processes and developing some questions around that. If their purpose is around advocacy and funding sorts of uses, then we're probably going to think about, well, what's our return on investment? How are we spending funds? How accountable are we for those? Another question for some of our funding stakeholders. The third place that this comes into effect is when we're getting into the implementation plans. So it's one thing to have a nice list of evaluation questions that you're going to ask and indicators, but knowing where our stakeholders fit and what their roles are also helps to inform implementation plans. So I've mentioned how often our stakeholders will have a role in recruiting or connecting us to different clients or other agencies that they're working with. Sometimes their roles will also extend to being involved within data collection. And so articulating that through this matrix really does help to inform how we implement the evaluation. And then the last piece is to make sure that we are getting them the right information products at the right time. So knowing what their needs are, when those needs are emergent, really does make sure that we're going to be giving them, maybe it's not a comprehensive report, maybe it's a memo at some point, maybe part of their purpose is to provide information through regular newsletters. So we're going to be feeding little pieces in throughout. Whatever it is that their purpose is, it shows up in our information products as well. So here's some of the questions that we use in conversation and planning with our stakeholders. The first is really just knowing who they are. Sometimes this can be a big endeavor. If it's, a project that has sort of system-wide implications, then we may be looking quite far down through our networks to define who the stakeholders are, and then understanding what are they like. Are there any attributes to their organization that are important for us to know? That's one of the questions that we look at. Second is, why do they need the information? So asking them, why are you engaging in evaluation? Why do you want a report like this? Why do you want to ask these kinds of questions? Helps us really understand them and helps us understand how we can craft a product that they will use. Third piece here, how can the information solve their problems? So this helps us understand what role, data and findings might have in their decision-making process. The fourth piece that we look at is, what are you going to do with it? Do you want to share it broadly? Do you want to keep it internal? Do you want to, send information up to your board? Whatever it is, this is one of those interesting questions that we pose. And then the last is, how are they going to contribute to the evaluation? So, some people may be used to being sort of a passive recipient of a final report, less used to being involved within the evaluation and really thinking of themselves as contributing to that work, as opposed to just hiring a consultant and saying, here you go do the work. We like to pose this question to them, and doing that helps to build their use. It helps to build their interest and engagement throughout the entire project, so that hopefully whatever products, whatever findings we produce are used. So here's a sample stakeholder matrix. So this is from an actual project that we've been working on recently. The stakeholder types here, we've grouped them into our funders and sponsors because there are multiple groups who are involved in that kind of role. Clarifying who our technology partner is. This is a home health monitoring project designed to support patients with chronic diseases to monitor their conditions at home and be followed by a nurse. PCNs and providers, so here's an acronym. I'm sure we all work in lots of acronyms, but this is for our primary care networks, who are some of the main stakeholders within this project. And then our patients as well that are participating in this monitoring project. Next column is just for the different stakeholder names. So I'll break this out into different rows if each of the different stakeholders has different purposes as well. So you can see for funders and sponsors, I've given each of Health City, Boehringer Ingelheim, and Alberta Innovates their own row because their purpose and use and the way that they're involved in the evaluation differs a little bit. So that's in contrast to the PCNs and providers role, where I've put all of the PCNs in here together because they are serving the same, or they have the same purpose and use in mind, and they are involved in the same way. They just happen to be different organizations. So in purpose and use, you see some really common themes coming up in this column. I don't like to get super complicated in here and articulating, long sentences for each of the stakeholders or partners' intended purpose or use. I like to summarize as much as possible. So that's why you'll see some single word things in here, like accountability, advocacy, those sorts of things. The nature of involvement is where I like to make sure that I articulate a few more details. So you can see that Health City here is quite involved in the evaluation of this project. So they're advising on the purpose of the evaluation, they're advising on the plan, they are supporting some survey deployment, they're reviewing our draft report, they're informing findings and recommendations, approving a final report, and then going on to do some knowledge mobilization. whereas Boehringer Ingelheim and Alberta Innovates sort of a step back from that. They're going to receive the final evaluation report and do some knowledge mobilization. So they are, both funders and sponsors, but each has a different role. And so this matrix really helps us to articulate what those different roles look like so that we can make sure that we're meeting each of these different groups' needs. Another example that we've worked on here, and I've just kind of de-identified it a little bit. So you'll see under the stakeholder types there's a generic partnership name. Obviously, this organization does have a real name, but we've got some government partners in here. We've got some different network members within this initiative that we're looking at, and different types of participants in here as well. So the purpose and use, you'll see some similar words because they work for me in many of my projects, and so I will reuse them project to project. But a few different kinds of things in here as well. We've got assurance for the implementation subcommittee. We've got some more kind of coordinating elements for one of the network partners as well. Nature of involvement here is, you can see just from the size of the rows really, who has the sort of driving role in the evaluation. So here that's the implementation subcommittee. They're going to be involved in informing data collection and providing background documents, advising on the plan, facilitating connections, informing findings and recommendations. And then the last piece that I put in there is promote evaluation. So wherever we can, this subcommittee is going to work with us in trying to build sort of a culture of evaluation and help to promote evaluation in their partners, all of which drives toward use quite broadly. So that's essentially all I wanted to show you today. It's a fairly simple tool, but I've found it to be quite powerful. My call to action for you then is to try it out. I would love to hear how it works in your practice, so feel free to reach out to me by email, shelby@3hive.ca. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect. We're on Twitter as well. I suppose we have telephones. I don't really use that, but I could probably answer the phone too if you wanted to chat. And of course, during the conference, available to chat through FeedLoop as well. So thanks for your attention, and enjoy the rest of your conference.